Hey all, this is Gnosis, and as I said, this is going to be the top 20 SNES best NES game of all time, like Nintendo Entertainment System, not Super Nintendo. It's going to be the NES games, and we've already done the Super Nintendo list, and the PC list, of course, and this is also a one-shot. However, one thing that I need to explain first is, at first I did do some changes to the list, but I still consider it a one shot because at first, right, I had I first had like Super Mario Bros. 1, Super Mario Bros. 2, Super Mario Bros. 3, like specifically the polyuse version of Super Mario Bros. 2. I could have had Lost Levels on there. Well, technically, like the Super Mario Bros. 2, but that's a Famicom exclusive one, and I haven't played that because the All-Stars version, the Lost Levels, is different because the physics are different in those comparison to because the original Famicom version of Super Mario Bros. 2 is actually harder than the All-Stars version because of the physics being different. But yeah. So I had 3 Super Mario Bros. Games. I had 2 Mega Man games, Mega Man 2 and 3. Stuff that I could have added like more Mega Man games on there because, in my opinion, 4, 5, and 6 are actually better games, technically. Is what I would consider them because, they were different games, and like 4, 5, and 6 are technically easier than the earlier games. Of course, 2 kind of standing out because 2 had like the whole easy mode on it, which was considered a normal difficulty, which was weird because the normal difficulty was the easy difficulty, and the real normal difficulty that was normal, like in Japan, was actually difficult. They didn't have several difficulties. Difficulty was the normal difficulty and stuff that, right? So that when people played it on here and they were like, oh yeah, I beat Mega Man 2, and then they just beat what is the easy mode because the normal mode is supposed to be the difficult mode, right? Because that's the one that matches more Mega Man 1 in difficulty and Mega Man 3 and stuff that, because yeah. Right, so that. I could have, technically I couldn't have had more Legend of Zelda on there. I mean, 2 is really good, like Avenger of Link and stuff that, but that's very, very different, and it's just that the people are so split on Adventure of Link and stuff that there are some people that really, really enjoy it, right? But Adventure of Link really, really took time to really, really get good at and stuff that, right? Like, Adventure of Link is considerably harder in my opinion and stuff that because not all people can get good at the type of combat that it had and stuff that, But yeah. So, and when it came to Castlevanias, for example, I could have had both Castlevania 1 on there. Castlevania 2, not so much. I mean, maybe without Castlevania 2, Metroidvanias wouldn't have existed. But I do think that Metroidvanias, right, was way more influenced by something like Super Metroid when they decided to make them, and like when they made it like Symphony of the Night. Like, I don't think that they looked back on, Castlevania 2 was interesting, and that's where they took the whole Metroidvania from. I think it was more that they looked at Super Metroid or something like that, rather than them actually looking back to Black Castlevania 2 and stuff that, right? Because we know that devs for Japanese games, they of course play other Japanese games as well, like the devs of Final Fantasies did play like Dragon Quest as well, and stuff that, and maybe even like all the old Ultima games and stuff that, and other stuff. So yeah. But anyway, there's gonna be 20 games. I'm gonna try and do this like shorter and stuff that, and like making it like super lengthy and stuff that, right? Because So at number 20, which is the lowest on the list, by the way, but I think that people have figured out that number 1 is the highest, of course, because why would I begin at number 20 and begin with one that would be highest, right? Because it's a top 20, but it's like, like the number 1 is the highest, right? Because otherwise I wouldn't mention it, So, but at number 20, we have a game that is on there really because of my dad and stuff that, because my dad played this with his brother several times. I don't remember if we technically owned the game or if it was my brother's game, or my dad's brother's game, if it was his game, or if they rented it or whatever. But they played Spy vs. Spy against each other several times and stuff like that. And that was really what Spy vs. Spy was made for. You could play against the CPU, but that's not really the same thing as playing against one another and stuff like that. And Spy vs. Spy was really, really interesting because, there was a limited amount to where you could play where you could place like traps and stuff that was limited, right? And it was all about like memorizing things, right? And stuff that, right? Because if you would quote unquote play it and use a bunch of like helping things, a bunch of tracking systems so you could track what room has what, that I would just make the game too easy and stuff that, right? And stuff that, because the main thing is that you're trying to remember, right, where things are and stuff that, where you put traps, and stuff that, because the way Spy vs. Spy was that when you played it, you could see where your opponent was and stuff that, right? And then you could try and be like, but there was a lot of rooms that looked similar and stuff that, so you could know where your opponent was, because like looking at the other person, because you wouldn't play it on two televisions, you would play it all both on the same television, so you could see where the other guy character was and stuff that, right? So it was a lot of like trying to plan, like, okay, like where am I going to put the trap? When is my opponent distracted a bit, and stuff that, right? Because you could look at their screen and be like, okay, he is at this room, but they were like limited use of colors and limited use of where certain things were, because there were certain points like, fighting each other can be really bad, because you're also trying to escape with the things, like you're trying to get like, what is it, a treasure or whatever, right? Like both of them are after the same things or whatever, like. And I think there were several maps, actually. There was one map where there were blueprints, I think you were after in one of the maps. And in one of the maps there were different things, because, But I won't talk too much about every game. But certain games I might be not even talk about at all. At number 19 we have Track and Field 2 and Track and Field 2, right? Like, even if you're not really a sports person, the thing that is great about Track and Field 2 is, of course, again, when you play it two players. Because there are certain things that are particularly fun, like just running 100 meters or whatever, or running like, use the whole thing when you run, and you have to mash a single button. But in certain ones, of course, you had to mash two buttons, so you had to alternate and stuff that, right? And certain ones you could use mash both at the same time, and stuff that, But I can do, there were certain things that were way more fun than others. Like the arm wrestling was really, really interesting, of course, if you played it versus another human being. But then there was also certain things like the can we part. We actually had to go through those things, those numbers and stuff that you had to go through and stuff that in certain order, and then, like things like that were interesting. The fencing was actually pretty good, if I remember correctly. There were like certain things that were like way more fun than others. The swimming was pretty good, if I remember correctly as well, and stuff there. So there were certain genres where there was actually really, really fun in Track and Field 2. Like, I don't think that everything was fun in Track and Field 2, but certain things were, certain events were way more fun than others, but Then at number 18 we have a very, very classic game, Snake, Rattle and Roll, which had a very, very interesting perspective in it. It kind of had like a 3D illusion to it, I would say, because it was isometric kinda and stuff that, and then you were basically like a snake that could get longer and stuff that, like you could get longer as a snake or whatever it was. I think you were supposed to be a snake, and stuff that, and then I believe there was also a 2-player thing in the game that was pretty interesting as well, but the levels were pretty interesting in it, and it had pretty good music, if I can recall, and I believe it was also technically almost one of their release games, or was it a release game? I think it almost was a release game, or something like that, because, But because the release games were technically the games, right, that were black boxes, right? Those were technically like the release games, right? The one that had black boxes specifically and stuff that, right? Because, then at number 17, we have the first of several puzzle games, I would say. And that is Dr. Mario, and maybe some people would have ranked Dr. Mario higher than certain of the other puzzle games. But Dr. Mario felt pretty simple, like you had two colors on the vitamins and stuff that. Vitamins, like not medicine. But they were vitamins, and they could have like two different colors. And then the viruses came in several colors, and you had to put like a red thing on a red virus. But then I believe you had to put several reds on where the virus was, I think, to eliminate it. It wasn't just like one red vitamin on the virus was enough. You had to touch them with two, I think. Maybe there was only one. I forgot exactly how it was. And stuff that, but it was done in a very, very interesting way and stuff that. And Dr. Mario was pretty unique, because it felt like a more simple version of Tetris, I would say. It's not really Tetris because you didn't have the whole patterns and stuff that, right? But the fact that there could be a certain amount of virus, and then of course there were different difficulty levels to it as well. So So if you weren't super good at puzzle games, you could just start out and have it very, very easy in the beginning and stuff that. But then you get harder and harder. And Dr. Mario it had really, really good music as well, and stuff that. But then at number 16 we have Blaster Master. Yes, who ruled Bartertown? No. But it was interesting, right? Because like there were levels that were technically like shoot 'em up levels, right? Where you go from one side of the screen to the other, right? And then there were ones where you actually control the thing on the ground, right? Because it had that vehicle thing that were like, what was it, like a tank? Or like a hybrid tank, because it was a tank that were more mobile than other tanks. Like it could jump, if I remember correctly. And I forgot if in original Blaster Master, if you could exit the vehicle. I think you could. And stuff that, but maybe that was later on in late Blaster Masters. But yeah. But I'm pretty certain Blaster Master was one of the release games. Except it wasn't in a black box, I'm pretty certain, the Blaster Master game. And that was the game that really made you buy the almost like arcade sticky looking thing, like the really, really huge thing. That were specifically designed for Blaster Master, if I remember correctly. Back in there, because it was one of the things that were released with the console itself. And stuff that, like one of the things that were released. You know, it almost felt like I was leaking there, but I was not. It just felt like that. But yeah, but anyway, at number 15 we have Bobble, which is a platformer, but it's also a puzzle game at the same time. I mean, it's an action platformer really, because Bobble have like stages. You have to bubble enemies. There are like things that comes out, like what is it, fruits, like different food items that can appear that are really, really good to get. And then of course you can like, if you don't like hit the enemies when they're bubbled, and you like get rid of them, like they become like stronger versions that are even faster and stuff that, which can cause this. And in the beginning it's fairly easy, but you can also play like 2 players and stuff that. It makes the game way more interesting and stuff that. But even if you use playing it solo, right, it just had so many stages to it and stuff that, and it had really good music, right? But then, right, wasn't there only just one track really? The dun 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 dun, you know, and stuff that, right? But there would like different music also that was a thing that could spawn if you took too long on the levels. Like on the early levels, it was just literally impossible to spawn it, right? But it was like a whale-looking thing, if I remember correctly. That you could spawn like an evil whale or whatever, right? You know, like a Death Stranding whale, you know, like an evil undead whale, you know. Yeah, those were the Death Stranding icon, which came from Bobble, because that thing that appeared when you ran out of time, and then the ghosty spooky whale or whatever it was that appeared. They would literally chase you down and stuff that, and it was like fast and stuff that, if I remember correctly. And at number 14, we have the first real technical platforming game. And that is, of course, Kirby's Adventure. And Kirby's Adventure is pretty low because yes, it's a very good platformer, but it's so easy. And stuff that you know, which, you know, is fine. Like Kirby games are meant to be easy and stuff that, right? And it's, you know, like, and it had like pretty good graphics, and it was released a bit later on the system and stuff that, and it was really, really good looking, but it was also pretty short, if I remember correctly, and stuff that, so yeah. But of course, it's not necessarily a bad thing, you know, and stuff that. But you know, you remember like a lot of NES games, they made like really, really hard, so it would take like a long time to go through and stuff that, you know, but yeah. And then at number 13, we have Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles. No, not Ninja Turtles, Hero Turtles. Which is what they were calling the PAL region, of course, and well, I will say that the Amiga 500 version of Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles was used way better, because I have the Amiga 500 version of it and stuff that. It was just a way better game because it looked more like Super Nintendo-esque in graphics on the Amiga 500. But Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles was the next game, of course, and it was pretty good. Because, of course, if you play the PAL version of these games, rather than the US version, these games ran slower and stuff that, so which kind of made certain games actually easier because they ran slower and stuff that, so it made certain games like less hard and stuff that, because yeah. But Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles was, of course, a fairly big game, really, if you consider things. And then, of course, if you got really good at the game, right, you could try and clear it with certain specific characters, like, oh, do you want to try and clear the entire game with like Michelangelo, or would you try to do it with Raphael and stuff like that, because yeah. Because, of course, the different characters were good at certain different things, but then, of course, you could rely on, like, the throwing stars that were really good. Like, there were certain stages you could kind of farm to get certain things, and then you needed to remember, okay, like, where are the full pizzas and stuff that can, like, respawn and stuff that, right? And then next up at number 12, we have another puzzle games, Mario and Yoshi. Yes, there was a puzzle game used Mario and Yoshi, which is not the same as the other two puzzle games above it and stuff like that, right? Or the three puzzle games right above it. Yeah, and Mario and Yoshi was interesting because you had a whole stack, right, of like, what was it, enemies, right? Enemies that got stacked or whatever, right? And you had to pair the enemies together and stuff like that. And they were like enemies from the Mario games. If I remember technically in Mario and Yoshi, they were enemies from the Mario series, like bloopers were in it, I believe. I forgot what all the enemies were that were in it, and stuff like that, But yeah. And Mario and Yoshi was pretty good because it was more advanced, I would say, than Dr. Mario was and stuff like that, right? But Mario and Yoshi kind of felt pretty unique because of the whole art style and the fact that it was Mario and Yoshi and stuff like that, right? And the artwork on the game, like the Yoshi on the game looked way more like the Super Mario World Yoshi rather than like, because if you have seen the artwork on another upcoming game, then that Yoshi looked very, very different to what this Yoshi looks like. The one on Mario and Yoshi looks way more like the Super Mario World artwork of Yoshi and stuff there, because yeah. And then at number 11 we have Adventure Island Classic, which is also known as Adventure Island in the Pacific. And both titles is what it was called here in PAL region. Yeah, because, yeah. So even within the same region, you have the both of the versions are like Adventure Island Classic or Adventure Island in the Pacific, because the Adventure Island in the Pacific also on the box had Classic on it in a small little thing. But otherwise, the artwork on the box of both of these were exactly the same, the artwork and stuff like that. So yes, it was the same game because I double checked and stuff there, because I was that seems weird, like, but I don't remember there being several Adventure Island games. Well, technically there was a second game as well, but the second game was called with a 2 in it, I believe. I think it might have been 3 Adventure Island games on the NES, maybe. And I'm pretty certain that Super Adventure Island was technically meant to be a remake almost of one of the Adventure Island games. But yeah. Then at number 10, of course, and the top 10s here are very, very much higher than all the other games that were below it. And number 10 is Mega Man 2. Yes, choose Mega Man 2 over Mega Man 3. Because Mega Man 3, I mean, it is fairly well balanced, but once you get to the dock robots, a lot of them are complete bullshit, because there are certain attacks that you really cannot dodge at all. I mean, technically it is possible to dodge it, but it requires very, very specific timing. That is almost like absolutely ridiculous, and that's because the bosses that the dock robots were based on had a certain size to them, like Woodman, for example, like you could jump one of the leaf attacks that he did. And that leaf attack is not, I mean, technically it's still jumpable when the dock robot you see, but because of the dock robot is taller, basically he has a higher pixel height, means that the attack is actually bigger, so the attack is harder to jump and stuff like that. And yeah, and it's just like, I think it's pixel perfect. The jumping of it and like getting the timing right for that is like really, really hard. So yeah, and that was a bit of a bullshit thing. So if you didn't have enough E-tanks for that, you would completely screwed. Like, yeah, you could kill all of the dock robots without E-tanks, but like it was fucking rough. And stuff like that. And Mega Man 3 felt needlessly like lengthy to it. Like they tried to like make the game as long as possible. It kind of felt like a lot of it kind of felt like very, very bullshit and stuff like that. And Mega Man 2 is used so much more straightforward. And yes, sure, like it having an easy mode was actually an important part of liking it. I feel like the fact that they did have the easy mode. But then of course you didn't really beat it until you beat like difficult mode, because that was the actual real normal mode and stuff like that, because yeah. But I do think that Mega Man 2 was really, really that much better and stuff like that, but yeah. But Mega Man 3 was of course more interesting, but I would say that in my opinion, if I would have gone even more personal, I probably would have put 3 Mega Man games in there, and I wouldn't have put Mega Man 2 at all. I would have put Mega Man 4, 5, and 6 into the list, because 4, 5, and 6 is easy, right? 4 introduced a shard shot, right? 4, I think, right? But then of course in 5 and 6 the shard shot became even better, or at least in 5 I believe. And then in 5, was 5 the one that introduced the jetpack, that introduced like the more rush features, right? That where you could fly, and then you could do the whole punching thing, because there was an adapter that you unlocked for it. Like, yeah, it was really cool. Like, and then you had 6, of course, but yeah. But if I would have gone more personal, I would have definitely put all 3 Mega Man games on there, like 4, 5, and 6, you know. Because they're better games, I think, than Mega Man 2 and stuff there. Because, yeah, but I took Mega Man 2 just because Mega Man 2 is more of a consensus on it, you know, if, you know, sure, certain people would put, of course, Mega Man 3 instead of Mega Man 2, but Mega Man 2 is my choice, and I know a lot of other people would choose Mega Man 2 as well, if there was going to be a Mega Man game on the list. Number 9, we have another puzzle game, and it's Wario's Woods, which also technically have some enemies in it, but the enemies aren't necessarily like Mario enemies. From what I remember, the enemies were just like very different and stuff that, and those enemies were, I think, were enemies that showed up in later like Wario Land games and stuff that, the enemies that were in Wario Woods. And the thing is, the way you got rid of them, I believe, was with bombs. So bombs feels very Wario thematic, and Wario also had like a, not an airship, but he had a plane. He had like almost like a Red Baron-esque plane, like one of those old school planes, like biplanes or whatever you call them, you know, and stuff that, you know, and it was, you know, pretty interesting. And I do remember that Wario Woods was one of those very, very late NES games. Like the Super Nintendo was already out, I believe, when Wario Woods came out. Wario Woods were very, very interesting, of course, because they made it like definitely feel like it was Wario team and stuff that, the fact that they had the bombs and stuff that, you know, and, you know, and I believe, like, I forgot what the story was, because I believe that he actually kidnapped one of the good characters or whatever, right, and they had to deal with whole bomb situation and the enemies and stuff that, you know, stuff that, Wario doing Wario things, you know, and stuff that, you know, and then Wario's Woods, like, what the fuck, he fucking owns a forest or whatever, right, you know, and it's like, yeah, it's just a very, very good puzzle game. And then at number 8 we have the Castlevania game, the Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse, because of course, if you're gonna include any of the Castlevania games, 3 is just better than all the other Castlevania games on it. 3 was the most advanced also, because yes, you had 2 other, was it 2 other playable characters? Yeah, Trevor, right, because it wasn't Simon in it, right, it was Trevor specifically. You had Granth, you had Stefan, you had Alucard actually, so there were technically 4 characters, right, yeah. Because Gant could of course cling to ceilings and, you know, I don't remember if his default weapons were throwing daggers or whatever, or if his dagger could get upgraded to be throwing. Maybe his dagger could use that first use stab, but then he would throw it and stuff that, you know, with the thing, but yeah. And then Sifa was of course a spellcaster, and then Alucard of course could even become a bat, which was really, really powerful and stuff that, you know, and yeah. I guess the Winner 3 Dracula's Curse had like different routes, which I believe you had to take some of the different routes to actually unlock some of the characters in it and stuff that's, yeah. But yeah, and I do remember it was like you had to climb the clock tower, if I remember correctly, to get Granth. And then basically, okay, now you're done with clock tower, now go back down. And stuff like, oh shit, man. And then, like, you know, and going down is so much harder than ascending the clock tower and stuff, that's right. Right, because like you might think that, oh, I can just fall all the way down now, but you need to scroll the screen down because otherwise you'll just die. And of course at number 7 we have Final Fantasy 3, yes. The best of the Final Fantasies on the NES, because Final Fantasy 3 was of course, I believe, the first one, as I said before on another list, that Final Fantasy 3 was the first one where you would target something else if something died when one of your party members targeted it, and the other party members wouldn't waste their attack, and the attack would instead go into a new target. And Final Fantasy 3 was the first one with a job system. Although technically you could say that 2 had a job system on it, but it was more like open. But you had to basically create the classes in your own mind. In Final Fantasy 2, like, oh, I want this character to be an archer. Yeah, you could definitely make a character an archer. You could definitely make a character a dragoon, except you didn't have jump as a command, or whatever in 2 and stuff like that. But yeah, but Final Fantasy 3, of course. Yes, all 3, all of the kids in it, because they were kids in Final Fantasy 3 for whatever reason. And it's very, very clearly stated that they're all kids in Final Fantasy 3. Unlike, I believe in Final Fantasy 2, right, they were teenagers technically in Final Fantasy 2, or young adults, or whatever you want to call it. And in Final Fantasy 1, they were adults, I'm pretty certain, and stuff like that. But in Final Fantasy 3, they were specific kids. And technically, their starting class is technically the Onion Knight, but it was actually the freelancer class that you had start, or, I mean, technically you were the Onion Knight at the very, very start, but the Onion Knight It does become very, very powerful, but not until high level, right? If I remember correctly, right? Like, so you had odd scaling of that. Oh, up until a certain level, the Onion Knight is absolutely ass. And then once you reach, what was it? Was it 80 plus you had to reach before the Onion Knight? Then the Onion Knight stat go was just like, poof. And at level 99, there were the strongest class. But I thought that in Final Fantasy 3 wasn't the Onion Knight's power also dependent on the other classes? Or was that just a Final Fantasy Tactics thing? It's like the War of the Lions. Because in War of the Lions, of course, with the Onion Knight, the more classes you had leveled up to the highest level, the stronger the Onion Knight got in terms of their stats. So their stats could, I believe that they could have the maximum in every single stat in War of the Lions if you took the time to grind out every single other class in the game for the Onion Knight and stuff like that, right? So you could use like kick everything with the Onion Knight and stuff like that. And it kind of makes sense, right? Because, you know, like, but the Onion Knight, of course, needs the Onion Knight equipment. And getting the Onion Knight equipment isn't always the easiest. It's kind of like how in Final Fantasy 6 you had the Imp equipment. Like, if you got the Imp equipment and you made every character an Imp, then, like, yes, the Imp equipment is the best equipment in the game. Because with the whole full set of Imp equipment, it's not only the fact that you get very, very high defense, but you also have pretty high dodge. And what you want to have, because the relics that you have with it, right? Because you can have 2 equipable relics on a single character, right? Or 2 relics, right? You could have equipped on a single character. Or was it only 1 relic you could have equipped? I forgot. Because you wanted to have the jump effect. You wanted to have like so that your character could jump, just like a dragoon. And then I believe you wanted to have the jump effect, but then there was other thing you could have that strengthened the jump effect, that made it basically, that made the jump command into a high jump command, I think it was. That made it hit even harder, and you would hit for maximum damage, like almost like 100% of the time. But it did actually more damage than max damage, because if it was 9,099 damage and then it was like 1 hit, okay, then wow, there was 1 hit. But if it said, for example, like 9,099 damage and it was like 10 hits, then yes, it was almost like you dealt like way more damage than that. So there was technically a way they could go over 10,000 damage, but it didn't really work the same because of the multiple hits. But I think it kind of worked like that. Or at least it made it so that you did do over 10,000 damage, but it didn't do exactly like if it was like 9,999, right, and it was times 10, then it would have been like 99,000, right? 999. But that was not the damage that it did. It was like less than that because there were diminishing returns or something like that, but you dealt more damage and stuff like that, right? So if every single character were like a imp, and you had all the imp gear on all the imps, and then everyone used jump, then you could literally just beam you to everything. Like, you didn't have to care about like bosses that could do status effects because your imps were fucking fast. Because they were like small, like imps were tiny and stuff like that, right? In comparison with like kappa, as they were called, like they were technically frogs, is what imps were. Because they're known as or there was a character known as Kappa. The imp and Kappa is frog in Japanese, if I remember correctly. Well, technically they were imps. But imps is a mythological thing, I believe. Well, technically they're not a yokai. I don't think they're technically not like an evil demon or whatever, right? They're more of a, I mean, they were good demons, right? If I remember correctly, right? But I forgot if they were still called demons then or whatever, right? But yeah. Then next up at number 6, we have a really good platformer. Also made by Capcom, by the way. Was technically better than the Mega Man games. Which is Darkwing Duck. Yes, Darkwing Duck is Mega Man coded because there were bosses that you could choose in an order, if I remember correctly. And Darkwing Duck was actually like really good and stuff that like it was pretty advanced, and it had really good music, really good stages, like fairly competent, like it wasn't too hard, you know, whatever, right? But it was like really good, like what the fuck, this is better than the Mega Man games. And yeah, and it was, I'm pretty certain it was Capcom that made Darkwing Duck. Just like another upcoming game. Anyway, at number 5 we have Tetris. Yes. NES Tetris was really good, and technically the best version of Tetris on a console or whatever, if you consider the old console used, it wasn't the NES Tetris that was the best. I would say actually that the Game Boy version of Tetris was even better because, like, yes, you could, if you had parents, they most likely were playing the NES if you grew up around that time, right? Because, the NES games were fairly simple with the controller, with the amount of buttons, so even parents couldn't play it. And some parents, especially the female parents, would most likely enjoy the puzzle games. And Tetris was used as a good gateway thing, right? That, or if they enjoyed Tetris, then maybe they would enjoy Wario Woods, maybe they would enjoy Mario, Yoshi, maybe they would enjoy some other puzzle game, or another puzzle game that is actually coming up on a very, very insanely high position and stuff that, yeah. So there is a puzzle game that I put above Tetris and stuff, yeah. But the Game Boy version of Tetris is so much better. I did have a Game Boy though. I didn't have a Game Boy, but I might do a Game Boy list if people, leave in the comments below if you want me to do a Game Boy list. I didn't have a Game Boy, keep that in mind, but I know a lot of the good Game Boy games. But then the question is, do we include just the original Game Boy? Do we include the Game Boy Color? Because the Game Boy Color, I would say like this, that Game Boy went through different generations, because technically, right, the Game Boy Pocket, you might think, oh, the Game Boy Pocket is just a smaller Game Boy. The Game Boy Pocket was more powerful. The processor in it was slightly faster, if I remember correctly. The sound in the Game Boy Pocket was clearer than in the original Game Boy, and I believe the battery life was even better in the Pocket. And the Pocket didn't need the same insane amount of batteries that the original Game Boy needed. Like the Game Boy Pocket was, it required less. It drained the battery less fast. The screen was brighter, if I remember correctly, as well, and stuff that. And it was very good. And there was also a special version of it, a Swedish version of the Pocket one came out. But then of course you had the Game Boy Color, which I believe the original version of the Game Boy Color, right, was purple, right? Like dark purple. That's where that purple Nintendo Color came from. That was then used later on the GameCube controller, right? The original GameCube was purple, and that specific purple color, well, technically it was a darker purple that was used on the Game Boy Color. The original version of that, I believe, was purple and stuff like that. Yeah, or it might have been just a PAL Europe thing, but yeah. So the Game Boy, but wasn't there something called the Game Boy Light as well? Well, it was not the same as the Game Boy Pocket and stuff, right? Right, there were like a light. There were Game Boy, and then Game Boy Pocket or Light, and then there were Game Boy Color. And of course, there were on the Super Nintendo, there was the accessory, the Super Game Boy or whatever they call it, right? But you could have certain color schemes to a game, or you could create your own custom color scheme, if I remember correctly, because there was a certain color scheme that could make certain games look pretty decent. But the Game Boy Color was used often better, because then the Game Boy Color used some default colors for the game, and that was the official real colors that were meant to be with certain games and stuff like that, because yeah. And there were of course games that could only work on the Game Boy Color, that required you to actually get the Game Boy Color, that didn't work on the original Game Boy, but those games were a lot less of, but yeah. Anyway, number 4, DuckTales, yes. So DuckTales is not a game made by Capcom. They actually made 2 DuckTales games, DuckTales 1 and DuckTales 2. I never played 2 and stuff like that, and I know that 2 was pretty liked though. If I remember correctly, and 2 is technically the better game. But I didn't want to put 2 on there because I'm only familiar with DuckTales. Stuff that, and I don't know if the consensus would be that, or if other people would be like, oh yeah, DuckTales 2 is really, really that much better and stuff like that, because yeah. Because I feel like when people are talking about music, right, on the NES, like, yes, it's the DuckTales music that a lot of people remember. And it's not just like the Moon music and stuff that there's so many people are, oh, the Moon music. Yeah, sure, right. That might be known by like almost everyone, even people that didn't grow up playing the NES knows about the DuckTales Moon music. But then why don't people mention some of the other songs, like the Himalayas, right? Like the Snowy Mountain Place, and like the Transylvania, right? With the whole, you know, where you had the whole Magica the Hex was there, right? If I remember correctly, in the Haunted Castle or whatever it was supposed to be. But yeah, there were a lot of good music in it, and it was also very, very good. And you were greedy, you were looking for treasures, and there were so many hidden things in the game as well. Like it had like a lot of exploration to it and stuff that, right? And then you had like the extra like bonus sections that you could get into if you found launch pad and stuff that. And And I believe if you did levels in a certain order, and if you find launch pad on certain stages, that would unlock shortcuts, I believe, on certain other stages or something like that, right? Because, and it had like the whole character selection, but it wasn't like a terrorist man, or like crooked news goblin man, or like the Mega Man bosses, terrorist man. Like imagine if they completely troll with the new Mega Man game, right? With I forgot what they called it even now. The new Mega Man game, because it doesn't have a number. It's not called like a Mega Man 12. It's not called, it's called something else. And I feel like it's gonna actually be the bridge between Mega Man and Mega Man X, because it feels like they're taking the double gear system kinda, but they're kind of making it so that Mega Man looks like upgraded, like it looks like he's wearing something special. And stuff that then maybe it will be a Mega Man game where he get Mega Man X like power-ups. Like I'm not saying specifically that he would get the dash boots or anything, but imagine if he gets like special powers and stuff like that in a Mega Man game, and it's an actual Mega Man game that maybe have exploration in it. Because imagine if it's an open world Mega Man game, but an 8-bit game. Or I mean, the graphics doesn't look 8-bit, but you understand what I mean, right? That is more of like a exploration style game, or anything like that. But yeah, that would be cool. But yeah, but anyway, now it's the top 3 in these games. Again, it's actually a step up from the previous games. And yes, I know all the games are 100% masterpieces, but usually if I tell you that all these masterpieces are way ahead of the other ones, and that's true, and stuff like that. And number 3, we have the best puzzle game on the system, in my opinion, and it's Yoshi's Cookie. Yes, and Yoshi's Cookie used to have such an incredible team on it. The box art were pretty cool, but the Yoshi design of the box art was unique because it wasn't the Super Mario World looking Yoshi that was on like the Mario Yoshi cover. That the Yoshi's Cookie looked very different. And here's the thing, like the interesting thing with it is, I forgot if it told you in the manual, but actually it's not Mario's bakery, it's Yoshi's bakery. Because of course they bake the cookies. But it's like Mario is the one holding the tray, right? If I remember correctly, Mario is the one holding the tray. So it's not that Mario is employing Yoshi, it's like actually Yoshi is employing Mario, if I remember correctly. And then you had the different like cookies and stuff like that, and you had to match them and stuff like that. And in my opinion, right, I don't remember if the instruction manual explained this, but in my opinion, when you match the cookies together and they disappear, then I felt like, oh, that was supposed to represent you sending out an order to a customer or whatever, right? Like, oh, hey, I like these cookies, please. And then you send them out and stuff like that, And this is just a Yoshi-coded game because, of course, Yoshi likes eating stuff. And imagine, like, Yoshi having to hold back, like, not eating all the cookies himself and stuff like that, right? And just, like, Yoshi having a bakery just feels like so, like, oh, Nintendo Capper would definitely have a bakery. Nintendo Capper. Nintendo Caper, not Capper. Or is it Caper? I don't remember, but yeah. But Yoshi's Cookie used excellent game, and like yes, it's very very Tetris like, but it has like the different cookies and stuff that, right? And there were several of them. I cannot remember how many different type of cookies, but I believe they also introduced more and more cookies the later on you went into the game and stuff that, right? And it was just very cool with how it was made and stuff that, right? And it had really really good music also, if I remember correctly, and stuff that, right? And I forgot how late of a game it was, if it was one of those super late games on the NES or whatever, because there were like a lot of NES games that actually came after the Super Nintendo was already out. So, but again, it depends on your region, of course, depending on what region you were in. And number 2, my favorite platform on the system, Super Mario Bros. 2 PAL US. Yes, they're fake, Super Mario Bros. 2, the Doki Doki Panic one. But if you read the story about it, and maybe you only know the story about Doki Doki Panic, but if you know the story, it was still made by like Super Mario team, like the team that were made Super Mario. But Doki Doki Panic was made as a commercial product for a television set or something like that. It was a TV that had a built-in. I forgot if it was that the TV had a built-in NES, or if it was for a certain series of hotels or whatever it was, or something like that. And I do remember it was being shown to Shigeru Miyamoto and stuff like that, and he was impressed with the verticality of the game, that levels could go up and levels could go down. And then it was like, oh, Super Mario Brothers 2, like the Famicom version, oh, this seems to be too hard for the Europeans and the US market. We need something else. Oh, but hey, this Doki Doki Panic had like really really cool levels on it, like because Gumi Miyamoto had already been impressed by the fact that they had to show it to him before they made the Doki Doki Panic and stuff that, and they showed like the levels and stuff that, and he was impressed by that and be like, yeah, we can reskin this game to Super Mario stuff, and they did. And without Super Mario Bros. 2, a lot of enemies that are common in the Super Mario universe wouldn't have been common at all. Birdo wouldn't exist. Shy Guys wouldn't exist. Some of the bosses even came over to other games, like Mouse, and I'm pretty certain came up in other games and stuff like that as well. So yeah, there are a lot of things that came from Super Mario Bros. 2 and stuff like that, and technically from Doki Doki Panic. And the fact also that having Mario being the all-rounder, Luigi having like the high jump or the whole, almost like hover jump, and him being good at jumping, him being slightly faster also than Mario when it came to running speed, and then Princess being very slow at like digging up stuff, like Luigi were actually slower at picking up stuff if I remember correctly than Mario was. Luigi was slightly slower. But Peach was, of course, the slowest, and then Toad was the fastest both at digging and picking up stuff. But they could jump the shortest and stuff like that, yeah. And the fact that they had different, like, they were good at different things, felt like really, really good. Because normally, like in Doki Doki Panic, it was the father, it was the mother, it was the brother, if I remember correctly, and then it was one of the children. Or maybe there were two children, so whatever, right? And Toad was one of the children, and then yeah, because the father was meant to be Mario, and the mother was meant to be Peach, and then the male child was supposed to be Luigi and stuff like that. So yeah, if I remember correctly, or maybe one of the children were a teenager, and that's how they explain like Luigi's height and stuff like that. But yeah, but even though it was a reskin, right, it felt like way more than a reskin because the whole world when they, because they found like a lamp that they put down to get into where you found the mushroom, right? And they didn't find a mushroom. I forgot what it was that they found, because it was very Arabian inspired, like Arabian Nights, I think. It was inspired by one of those story things, if I remember correctly. But yeah, of course in the Mario universe it's very, very, very different, because it's all Mario is sleeping and Mario is trapped in a dream, everything was a dream. And I know stupid people out there that if a game is a dream or a game is inside a painting or whatever it is, then they're like, oh, then that makes me not care about the people in the game. So it was really easy for me to choose. And it's like, okay, like, but then you're then you have to be like mentally challenged if you cannot care about people if something is in a fantasy world, and you shouldn't be playing video games, because then you clearly very showing that the only way that you could care about character if you get manipulated, and that's how woke games work. That we have to have these super crying scene, or remember right the reason why they made Last of Us Part 2 woke, because Last of Us Part 1 wasn't really woke at all. Sure, you had like the whole lesbian thing and stuff like that, but even then, the whole gay dude and stuff like that, they didn't make it like super woke or anything. But then in 2, of course, they had to make things a certain way. And then, of course, the fact that it won a lot of game awards and stuff that made it so that people will remember too as, it's one of the best games ever made because look at all the game awards it took. And then it's just like, yeah, but it's like anyone that seriously is putting it on like a top 100 or a top whatever games of all time. And then they put Last of Us Part 2 over Last of Us Part 1. And it's just complete bullshit. And it's just because the game is woke, and stuff like that, and that's why they put it on the list. And then it's just because, look at Ellie and her story, look at how painful it did, they kill Joel, and yeah, sure, killing Joel is like really bad that they did and stuff like that, right? Especially because they did it so early and stuff like that, right? And they lied because in the trailers that they showed, it looked like Joel wasn't gonna die early on. That was kept like a secret and stuff like that. Because they were never like mentioned that Joel is gonna die early. Instead, they were like fake trailers. They were actually trailers. If I remember correctly, they were actually trailers that showed him at later parts in the game, but they were fake, and that's why the outrage became as big as it was. Because I'm pretty certain there were fake trailers that were made that technically showed him in places that he wasn't going to be. But those places were actually if I remember correctly, those places were actually the things that after Joel dies, of course, you still get scenes where you see Joel and they're explaining like other things that happened after the first game and stuff. They're like things that happen like oh, you go to a museum or whatever, right, and you find like a rocket thing that you go inside and stuff that, and there were like and there were dinosaurs there if I remember correctly as well and stuff that, right, and like those scenes were like really really good. But then the whole story about let's be lesbian and stuff that, and then be like yeah, I have to get revenge on Abby, and then and then even and then Ellie just lets her go at the very very end and stuff that, then it's just fucking stupid. Like okay, like then and they might say but then the story didn't matter at all and stuff that, and it just feels like the developers don't like games, and the developers are very like they're very they're very like, I don't know if it's like that they're cocks, or if it's like, oh yeah, we love getting humiliated, we love it when the white man dies and stuff that, like if they were like if they felt like, oh, we have to punish ourselves, that they enjoy punishing themselves, so let's make this story about this thing instead, and stuff that like, and maybe they hate the story themselves, and that they really really dislike the story themselves, and they're like, oh yeah, this story, and stuff, and maybe they hate themselves, maybe every single employee there on Naughty Dog, like hate themselves and stuff that, right? And it's weird, right? Because I mean, I'm pretty certain, right, that it was a Neil Druckmann's team that made like Uncharted, right, or even Crash Bandicoot, right, or even like Jak and Daxter, right? But it feels so weird, like how can you go from having made like Crash Bandicoot and then like you make the Jak and Daxter games? And of course, Jak and Daxter was only the first one. What it was called then was Jak 2 and Jak 3, and of course you also had a PSP game, the Daxter game. And then you also had the racing game, or two racing games technically. There were one where you had the vehicles, and then one where you had airplanes or whatever it was. But yeah. And then of course Uncharted series that was absolutely brilliant. And it was really, the Uncharted series wasn't woke at all. And stuff that, And then you somehow, The Last of Us Part 1, you could say that certain things were woke about it, but then The Last of Us Part 2 used... And I don't know why, Was it because Amy Hennig left? But wasn't she Crystal Dynamics technically? So why was she doing story parts in Last of Us? But wasn't she helping with that somehow? Because I know that she was responsible for a lot of the story in Uncharted games and stuff like that, but yeah. Because he was also responsible actually for the story in Soul Reaver. That was why the story in Soul Reaver, Legacy of Kain and all that stuff was so good, was because of her. Stuff that, because she know how to write a good story. And she didn't write Vogue stuff. Because then Vogue stuff comes from Neil Cuck, man. And as like, they made a scene where, where he had sex with someone. So then, and then people came as a defense and said, oh, but he hasn't done any motion capture. Oh yeah? Yeah, he didn't do any motion capture, but of course, if you do a self-insert of a character, you wouldn't do the motion capture yourself. You wouldn't make the character look anywhere like yourself, right, at all. Like if you do a self-insert into a game, you would make yourself ridiculously powerful in the game or whatever, right? If you were one of the hero characters, you made yourself like, or maybe you wanted to make yourself a villain or whatever, right? But you would never like motion capture yourself onto a scene or whatever, right? It would use something you could fantasize about, right? And then, like it's very, very weird and stuff there because, and maybe they got forced to it because maybe, it's problematic that Last of Us Part 1, like all Last of Us, because it wasn't even called Part 1 back then. It was like, oh, it's problematic because this is the white man game, this is the only Joel is evil, and stuff that, like, we have to stop that, so in the second game, we're killing him off really, really early and stuff that, right, because it is problematic to have a good white male character. There is like a dad figure, like, oh, we cannot have that, We got the message from that one country, that said like, hey, you cannot make the story like this in this video game. You have to make the story bad. You have to make it white man bad. And then they were like, oh yes, we will do whatever you want, Netanyahu. We will do whatever you want. We will make the game walking absolute garbage, and then we have to make Abby this way. We have to make her a muscly man and she has a fake vagina and stuff like that. And then I would totally have sex with that character. I'm Neil Cookman, who had and stuff like that, And then, of course, that means that number one, without any, which isn't weird at all, is the Legend of Zelda, yes. The original Legend of Zelda, because it was such a good game, and actually the reason why I probably like video games is because of that. And so one of my earliest memories is playing Super Mario Bros. 1 and stuff like that, or playing Super Mario Bros. And I think I probably were already maybe just 3 or 4 when I actually played the game for the first time. I used to think that I was 6 when I played the game for the first time, but I know that I was younger than that, but yeah. But I actually think that it's just that the first memory I have is just Super Mario Bros. But I'm pretty certain that I played the Legend of Zelda before we played Super Mario Bros. Because I'm pretty certain that we actually bought Legend of Zelda before we bought Mario Bros. Actually, and stuff like that. Because the Legend of Zelda would explain why I like exploration and stuff like that, And the Legend of Zelda, of course, that if you wanted to play it correctly, you played it completely blind. You didn't know where things were, And certain things would be that you watch your dad play the game, so you saw where he discovered secrets, and then you learn from that to where secrets were. But then it's also that certain secrets completely make sense where they are on the map and stuff like that. Like the people who say that, oh, you went and you put bombs on every single wall. Nah, the people who say that, oh, they did that in order to find every secret. Nah, if you had to do that, then it felt bullshit. The only thing where it felt like bullshit were down at the very, very south, where they were used like a straight line. Like there were two screens back to back that were used straight lines with like mountain or like rocks or whatever, right? Or the mountain, like the brown texture or whatever, right? And it was like the sea was here. There was like a beach thing that you were walking on. Or like it looked like sand, of course, obviously. But yeah, and then you had to bomb a specific spot on each of those 2 screens, if I remember correctly. But yeah, and stuff like that. And that was the only thing that felt like a bullshit location, because otherwise, when it came to burning down things and bombing things, like most of the places made sense, in my opinion, at least. And yeah, the fact that the Legend of Zelda was so open that you could have the blue ring before you even went inside a single dungeon. And yeah, sure, it was really bad if you got the... It was really bad if you got the... What do you call it? It was really bad if you got if you got the doors that were like, oh, hey, pay for my door repair, and stuff that, Because I believe the door repairs weren't the same cost all the time, right? There were certain door repairs that took way more of your money than certain other ones, that the value wasn't fixed. Or I believe the value was fixed, but there were certain door repairs that were way more expensive. And of course, if you did find the biggest secrets, there were like a couple of 100 secrets out on the map and stuff like that, because yeah, you needed 2 of those secrets, if I remember correctly, but I forgot how many of the secrets you could find right away. Because, of course, you could get the candle via the shop. And I believe you had to get the candle technically via the shop, the first candle, right? The second candle you did find, I believe, in one of the dungeons. But I believe the first candle you had to actually get in the shop. And stuff like that. But yeah. So those were the games. And stuff like that. And yeah. Next up would otherwise probably be the Amiga 500 on the PlayStation list. The main problem though is I don't remember too many of the Amiga 500 games. Like I do remember we had a lot of games. We had like the Moonshine Racers, which was really good, and we had the Lotus game. I believe it was Lotus game, right? It was the Lotus Esprit that you were driving. Those were pretty good. I do remember the Chase HQ. I never had Chase HQ1. I had Chase HQ2, which was also known as Super HQ, if I remember correctly. Like Chase HQ, because you were like a cop and you were chasing guys. But then in the second game you had a completely different vehicle, because the vehicle you had in the first game was based on an old Porsche, was a much cooler vehicle, but yeah. Yeah, so anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this list and stuff like that, but yeah. So you can leave in the comments if you want me to do a Game Boy list, because if I gonna do a Game Boy list, that is going to be the next list. If that is the case, because I knew what a lot of the good Game Boy games are. I know like how good Super Mario Land is, as a Mario Land 2 as well. And I also know how good the Legend of Zelda, the Link's Awakening is, but the Link's Awakening game, we would most likely put DX version of it on there because that's just a better version of the game and stuff like that. Because but the thing is, we only allow the regular Game Boy games and not like the Game Boy Color games, because I'm pretty certain that the DX version of Link's Awakening is the Game Boy Color version of a game. Because DX was for deluxe, right? DX, I think. Because, and I believe that's the one that came with the color dungeon or whatever they called it. Right, because that dungeon wasn't like a unique dungeon for the Switch version of Link's Awakening, but yeah. But yeah, so you can leave in the comments if you want me to do a Game Boy list or not. And I will probably wait with doing the next list whenever I decide to do it, because, we're getting close to the end of the year. Because I don't want to, like, ruin my voice by recording so many days in a row, and stuff like that, so yeah. But I hope you all will enjoy this, Because if we don't do a Game Boy list next, then I will most likely do the Amiga 500 list. But then I will probably need to look up a bunch of Amiga 500 games just so I can remember what games were on the list, where that I played, and stuff like that, because there were just so many good games on Amiga 500 and stuff like that, right? And yes, there were a limited amount of games that I did play, but I did play a lot of different games and stuff like that, right? And I also had a box that had like several different games on it. I had a box that had like the Last Ninja on it. It had that fighting game, the IK Plus or whatever it was called. The one where you had like karate people and they had like different belts and stuff like that. And then you had the mini game where you had the shield and you had to block the heads or balls or whatever it was you had to block. But yeah. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this and I'll see you all next time.